Kellianne, how are you?
I'm great, Ryan. How are you?
Doing good. This is gonna be fun because we now got you on the show. You and I have been spending a lot of time on the phone because yourself and one of our mutual contacts that you'll probably be talking about have we've been talking a lot about our course as you've been going through it. But you've sold a business. You're now in a whole new world. There's just a lot of stuff to talk about. So, but it's gonna be fun for me to go back and actually hear uninterrupted your story instead of all the other conversations we've been having.
Cool. Well, it's been so great spending this time with you and getting to know you, Ryan, and I'm really grateful that you're having me on.
Yeah, so let's for the listeners who are not familiar with you, your brand, let's kind of give your little overview of what your business was, how you got to where you are today, and then honestly, like how did you become an entrepreneur? Was it accidental? Was it on purpose? Or maybe take us back to day one.
Sure. Yeah. I definitely didn't start out in life with an entrepreneurial mindset. Come from very, humble background, very, middle class background. And, I knew that I wanted to get a higher education and figured out pretty soon in my college career that I wanted to become an attorney. So that was like my path. And that's what I thought my future was going to be, is practicing law for, my working life. And so went to college, went to law school, practiced law for about 10 years, civil litigation.
What kind of law was it? I don't know if you told me
Yeah,
that.
civil litigation. So mostly on the insurance defense side. So did a lot of like medical malpractice, a lot of insurance defense work, personal injury, construction defect. That was mostly the realm that I was practicing in. And, I loved it. It definitely was really stressful. But, when you're young and you just have, you just graduate from law school and you've got the world at your fingertips and you're not, married or have kids, it's very easy to like slave away at your job, right? And climb that ladder. And, I definitely did that for a few years, but, things change as you get older, as you settle down. I got married and had children, and, the life of a litigator just was not conducive to me living the life that I wanted to live, being a mom and a wife. It just, the two just did not mesh. And
It's hard to
so,
engineer more than 168 hours a week, isn't it?
yeah, yeah. Like I still, Ryan, to this day, have nightmares about billable to account for every 6 minutes of my time, like how I spent it, so I could justify to an insurance company who was paying the bills that that time was well spent. Like I still freak out about that sometimes.
Well, and I think so. This is going to be a fun lens as you tell your story, because right before we jumped on, you were talking about getting off the hamster wheel as an entrepreneur, and that is a whole different hamster wheel compared to
Yeah,
like that. That's literally like that there is no other. The exchanging money for time is
yeah.
that.
That's the epitome of trading. You don't make money unless you're working and working and accounting for every 6 minutes of your time. It doesn't get harder than that.
So how did you go from that to being an entrepreneur?
Well, it wasn't I was just on a podcast interview yesterday, and it wasn't like I went straight from practicing law to being an entrepreneur. I actually was really lucky enough to just take some time off in between there and be a full-time mom. And, did everything with my babies as they, were in their early years, and very involved in their schools and all that kind of stuff. So, there was always this, little voice in the back of my head. Okay, like once they, really start getting into school, you're going to have to find something to do, and it's not going to be law. I did kind of dabble in some other areas of the law towards the end of my career, but just still really realized that I just didn't want to go back to law at all. So I was a stay-at-home mom for a few years. And then I just knew, Ryan, that I wanted to do something that I could work from my kitchen table if I had to, or my home office, and be internet based. So I went down the whole trail of, how to make money online, basically, and tried a lot of different things and learned a lot, but was not successful, and certainly didn't generate any income from doing all these internet marketing things that I tried. And,
It's
sooner
just
or
super
later,
easy. All you have to do is build this beautiful sales funnel, and then the money will just come through the door.
exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So, learning all the technical aspects that go behind that, plus the marketing aspect of it. Yeah, I learned a lot, but it was like the whole time I just felt like an uphill battle. And, the whole make money online industry in general it can be pretty seedy. And so, I would say I spent like a good year or two in that realm, in that world. And I really didn't like it. I really didn't like the educators in that space, and the opportunism that was there. So I
What didn't
definitely
you
was
like
looking
about
for
it?
something else.
What didn't you like about it?
it just seems so, like, I couldn't get out of my head the fact that, all these people are making money by selling people a dream of how to make money doing what they're doing. And it all just seemed like we were all just this incessant pool of, like, cesspool of people just making money off of each other. I know that sounds like really, really bad. And
No, no, it's funny because I went down that rabbit hole like 5 years ago when I was starting the podcast. And I was like, well, I don't have a team of salespeople anymore, so I need to like automate this. And I was like, this kind of feels like a fun house of people making money off of people to teach you how to do a webinar to make money on a webinar. I'm just like, what in the heck is this?
Exactly. Exactly. It's like it was really hard to find underneath all those layers, like, what's the true value being exchanged here?
Yep, yep. So after you realized that was not your jam, what was the pivot?
Well, in a lot of these groups that I was in, I did find some good people. And so one of the groups that I was in taught this model of how to drop ship e-commerce products on different websites. And particularly at that time, it was eBay. And then, it slowly moved into Amazon. But so I started pursuing that model and started seeing success with it, and really, like, very early on, fell in love with just selling physical products. Like, they're actually tangible. Something actually is exchanging money for an actual product, not a digital product. And it was something that just really resonated with me. And it didn't take too long for me to really kind of formulate this desire to, why couldn't I create my own brand of products? And it just so happened, when I started to have that notion, that a course came along into my inbox called Amazing Selling Machine. It's now called amazing.com. And it taught all about the model of launching, scaling a brand on amazon.com. So I jumped into that. It was a really good digital course. So there are plenty of great digital courses out there. So,
Yeah.
and through that, really found, like, I felt at home, like, this is what I'm meant to do.
So I'm excited to want to either peel that back for a second, or maybe you can take it as you tell your story, Kelly. Is there's a lot of, because in some of these other entrepreneur groups that are e-commerce, and maybe then this is a good time for you to describe, Kelly, the e-commerce and the kind of the different variations of them for the listeners that may not be involved in this too much, where you have people like yourself, like when you started, where you're drop shipping, so you're selling products, but then there's the Amazon channels, and then there's also the fact that you can also all of a sudden are starting to make your own products, because those different dynamics, as you and I both know now, and we can talk further about, have different values long term as a business, right? Whether you're just
Absolutely.
reselling someone else, or whether you're drop shipping your whether you're warehousing or not warehousing, or whether you're creating your own product, whether it's on Amazon or on Shopify, all those different strategies have different values that are sustainable down long term. So maybe, I don't know if that confuses anybody, but I want to make sure that as you talk about your journey and then the eventual exit, how those different strategies might impact the end result.
Absolutely. And definitely there are different models of selling. I'm gonna classify it all as selling physical products online. That's what I classify as e-commerce in general. And there's
Mhm.
many different models. And whether or not you're going to have a sellable, transferable business depends on that model.
Mhm. So when you started out, you were just selling other people's products. Is that so? And was that
Yes.
on Amazon or on Shopify, or was it on eBay or
I
what?
was I was basically arbitraging from one website to another. So that
Okay.
was not a sellable business. That was a job, basically.
Okay. That's awesome.
And
Yep.
so I was finding products, let's say, on websites like Wayfair, and I would sell those on eBay. And so basically, there was just an arbitrage type of play to be made there, where people were paying more for the product on eBay, and I would just ship it directly from the customer from Wayfair. Now, that's called online arbitrage, basically. Other people get started in e-commerce with doing retail arbitrage, where they go to physical stores and they buy products and then they resell them on Amazon or eBay. I don't enjoy shopping, like going out to stores. So that was never for me. But it's certainly a way to get started and build up some cash flow. But that's not a business; it's a job. So there's wholesale. So if you can develop exclusive relationships with brand owners and sell their product, like be their exclusive distributor or seller, there is value in that. You can build a really good cash flow business that way. And that potentially can be sold if you secure that exclusivity and can transfer that to a new owner. But I would say that in e-commerce, in order to build a sellable, valuable asset, you need to be having your own products manufactured, basically building a brand. That's really where the big value is.
Well, and I think what's interesting, your journey that you went on doing this is that what I've been watching in the e-commerce space over the last few years, where there was a lot of arbitraging going on, people making really good money for it. But then all of a sudden you're like, well, it's not sellable. So then it was like, well, now I can maybe then go on to Amazon and resell stuff on Amazon. But well, maybe I should be warehousing my own stuff. Well, maybe I should be having my own Shopify site. And so they kind of just continue to evolve, and then all of a sudden now you're like literally in the traditional business model of like,
Exactly.
and now you just kind of worked your way into like a normal business that a lot of Main Street companies have, which I think there's an interesting dynamic too, because a lot of Main Street companies now are trying to figure out how to go online, and they're going the opposite direction, trying to figure out how to do, which has been a good opportunity on both sides.
Yeah, exactly. And specifically, learning how to leverage the Amazon platform. A lot of the big, brands out there don't know a thing about Amazon, and Amazon requires its own unique strategy. It's its own ecosystem. And so, I like to say that, no matter who you are, if you're a Fortune 500 company or a small seller, you have to be on Amazon. You have to have a good presence, and you have to be able to control your brand, whether that's allowing a reseller or distributor to sell your products on Amazon, or are you yourself taking control on the third party side selling on Amazon. That's really important.
So I want to go back to your story and then continue your evolution, but make sure I want to put a pin in this comment, because I have many clients that I'm working with currently right now, Kelly, that are in retail or they're in manufacturing. Specifically, I've got these two clients in mind that they're manufacturing, and they go through the old rep groups. I mean, like, you just exactly what you could think of, like old school catalogs, like buy this shit on, from this person. And they're like, hey, well, can't I just go to a website and buy this? But then they're like, yeah, well, we're going to like upset our rep groups. And so if we go online, we're going to, there's all this problem. But I think COVID might have an interesting play to make it like actually possible now. And
Sure.
I think my wife's old company that she used to work for did this, and they went from like 20 million to like 45 million by going on to Amazon. So let's put a pin in that, Kelly, when you're talking a little bit more about what you're doing, the strategy for Amazon, because I think that there's options for discussion on that. But I want to go back to your evolution, and then we can get there.
Cool. Absolutely.
So how did you go from the arbitrage into like, take us back. Sorry, I may have taken us on a rabbit hole.
No, not at all. This is great. I think it fits really nicely into my journey, because you try a lot of different things. And, it used to be, if before this whole selling on Amazon, creating a brand and utilizing the Amazon platform to launch and scale that brand, if you were going to create a product, like invent your own product or create a product, you would have to go out through all those old channels, try to get into retail. That's the old model. Now the new model is going direct to consumer online, such as Amazon, and then, scaling from there and then eventually getting into retail. So, I knew I wanted to create a brand. I had very specific goals for the type of brand I wanted to create. I created a women's outdoor lifestyle brand, and I was its target customer. So, it was easy from that standpoint. I created products that, people like myself and people that I knew would love and use. And so, not to make it sound so simple, because I had to learn how to manufacture products, how to design products, how to source overseas. I've been to China several times. That's where all my products were manufactured. So, you had to learn a whole new skill set. And, I can't put a price tag on that. Like, that's invaluable. Like, I majored in international business in college. And, now I can truly say I'm an international business person. I've been to China, I've designed products, I've had them manufactured, I've had them, shipped over, learned the whole logistics process that goes along with that. And basically used Amazon because they've got access to the biggest database of customers to reach those customers and sell my products.
So where did you start? I mean, like when you say like, because like it might sound daunting for someone that wants to start their own product line or has, and there's a lot of business owners that could be listening that have an infrastructure, but like how in God's name do you even start, right? And like is it design? Are you dealing with like the intermediaries between yourselves and the manufacturers in order to get like prototypes done? And now especially supply chains are getting all blown up. I mean, as in like they're changing rapidly. So like how did you start and what were some of the milestones?
Well, I think there's a progression there. So when you're getting started out and starting out like most startups or entrepreneurs do on a shoestring budget, which was certainly me. I started my business with $2,500. The typical route is going to a platform like Alibaba and
Mhm.
connecting with suppliers that way. And that's not to say that that's the best way to source products, but that's kind of where, if you're going to be manufacturing overseas, that's generally where you're going if you're getting started, is on a site like that. Over the years, I became much more sophisticated in terms of developing my supply chain and supply chain management and, meeting directly with manufacturers by going to China and then also working with, expert, providers that, provide you with all of the supply chain management. But that comes with a cost, and you can't do that until you've grown your business and you're profitable and that can fit
Mhm.
within your margins. But I would say that that was one of the things that made selling my company highly attractive, or my brand, I should say, is that I completely streamlined that supply chain to where, it was one contact person, English speaking, can have anything designed, made in China, have it shipped over. It made it pretty seamless, but that takes time, and there certainly are a lot more service providers out there now that one could go and hire to help with that process versus having to do it all on your own.
So then, which makes sense, and I think it's funny because I did a podcast 201 with Dave Deal about valuations, where now because of COVID and trade wars and China U.S. relations, that there are cracks in supply chains going on everywhere. They're highly exposed, and I think that I'm assuming there's a lot of people in your space too, Kelly, that they were doing a lot more arbitrage, and they might have been perceived as really awesome, valuable companies that you're just like, wait a second, you don't have a whole lot of control over this.
Yeah.
and it's super obvious now because of lag times, or inventory is not turning, or you can't get inventory, or I mean that's you've probably seen a lot of that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was so lucky, Ryan. The sale of my brand closed in February of this year of 2020, so right before everything hit. But I keep in close contact with the gentleman who purchased my brand, and so the fact that he has the supply chain manager to help navigate through all of this stuff was, I think, pretty valuable, and it made me feel really good about the
That's
fact
awesome.
that, I mean, who could have predicted COVID happening, right? Like
Yep.
even the gentleman told me that, after COVID hit, it's like, oh my goodness, like what have I done? I just bought this company and how all this stuff with China and everything else, but it all worked out. He's doing fine. He's doing great. The brand is doing great. A lot of brands have suffered during this time. A lot have flourished during this time if their products, are in demand. And it's also forced a lot of sellers to look elsewhere for their product manufacturing needs. I mean, we all
Hmm.
wish we could manufacture in the United States. That would be awesome, and for certain products it's possible, but for a lot of them it's not. So other Asian countries have become new kind of sourcing opportunities, along with South America and India. So it's definitely, I think, started the chain reaction of not being so reliant on China.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So, as you're like, I don't know, for time wise, in your timeline, like how did you, as you're building these products, what was the evolution of the business? I mean, was it all on Amazon? Did you have your own website and like a Shopify website, or maybe kind of give an overview of the structure and as it evolved?
Yeah, my primary sales channel was Amazon, but I did have my own website, and I did spend, you know, probably the better half of over a year really trying to drive traffic to that website as opposed to Amazon. And one thing I feel very strongly about is that the skill set that's required to optimize and excel on the Amazon channel is a completely different skill set than driving traffic to your own website. Amazon already has the traffic. You just have to figure out how to capture that. If you're trying to drive traffic to your own website, you have to be really good at driving that traffic, whether it's from social media or from Google Ads or from content marketing, whatever it
Hmm.
is. And so a lot of Amazon sellers go down this rabbit trail of trying to be everywhere, where their skill set is on how to sell on Amazon. So I would caution Amazon sellers specifically to really focus on what they're good at, and not be trying to do all this other stuff in other sales channels until you're at least at $1 million in top line revenue. But there are a lot of huge e-commerce brand owners that have no presence on Amazon, and they're doing great, and they know how to drive that traffic.
That's such a huge point, Kelly. And I think it goes back to what you were saying about like the online course stuff, because like it's like, oh yeah, all you have to do is just drive what traffic to your website instead of Amazon. You know, well, conceptually, yes, but then that's 2 years worth of work and costs and distractions, and what's the end result and what's the point, right? Because it is way different compared to where you're getting your traffic and your sales. Just they're different skill sets.
Exactly. And I mean, conversion rates are different on Amazon compared to your own e-commerce site, obviously. And a lot of Amazon sellers are selling products, in the, $30 or below price point. And it's really hard to make that profitable. You don't have, and they're one-off products. So unless you have, a subscription model, it's really hard to make that profitable when doing it, off of Amazon.
That's a huge point. I mean, like because your client acquisition costs of paying for ads and paying and writing content and
Exactly.
driving, having customer support and so all that goes into the profit margins that may or may not even be there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So where in this, as you're building the business, and you think about just the stuff that you were talking about of growing the business, it's a shitload of work, right? Even you learned global supply chain, as you said, while you were creating the business. Where did your mindset start to shift to go, okay, what's the end result? Because like you and maybe we can just even talk about why you and I started talking months ago and got introduced. Is like, a lot of people don't think about that, right? They're just kind of almost like day trading on Amazon, and it's like, wait a second, what's the ultimate goal of this? Where did you realize that there needs to be some bigger picture here? And you said before we get on the show, the hamster wheel, and I don't know if that's ties into some story that you've got personally?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like a lot of e-commerce sellers and specifically Amazon sellers are caught up in this hamster wheel and they don't have the end in mind. They don't have any end in mind, and it's just a day in day out process of like what you said, day trading. And I started to really think about this probably about 2 years into the business. I mean, I loved every minute of growing my brand and I loved it, but when you start to look at the ROI on your time invested in any activity, and what, obviously, as you get older, this becomes more pronounced. I mean, if you're, 20 years old, living at home with your parents and you're doing this business, I mean, you can grind 24/7, right? But, if you've got other things in life you want to do, you start to really think about, okay, thinking about what your value drivers are, as you point out in your course, Brian, and really, what type of life do you want to have, and building your business around your life, versus your life around your business. And so I had some pretty cathartic moments because I was building my life around my business, and I wanted it to be, I wanted it to be so that it was the other way around, like that I had that time freedom to do what I wanted to do, and whether that meant completely systematizing my business and handing it off to somebody just to take in the cash flow, or and grow it forever and then pass it on to my kids as a legacy, or cashing out, taking some chips off of the table. I started to question all those things about 2 years in, and really made a conscious decision that I did want to build a business to sell it. And so, I spent the next 2 years doing just that. And it was a 2-year process from the time that I decided I want to build a business to sell. And then actually, from the time that it actually sold, that was about a 2-year process.
And which we're going to get to, because I think how long it takes, people just underestimate. I was on this call, Kelly, actually before you and I got on the interview, and it's just like the point is the moment that you're out of energy. I've watched it too many times, and especially right now with all the shit going on, it's like it's hard to do hard work if you don't like the business or if you don't like it. I mean, it just is so painfully hard. And you did that. So you had that experience, but then you still had the energy to do, I'm assuming the energy to do it for 2 years because you
Yes.
took a while. So like I mean, was there something personal that you were going through, or like, was there a situation that you were just like, I'm not doing this kind of work anymore? Like I have to reshift, or I have to shift my mindset towards getting myself out of this hamster wheel. And like, where did you turn, and what were the things that you started doing differently after that shift happened?
Yeah, so it wasn't one huge thing, Ryan. It was a lot of different things, but it it definitely started to feel like a hamster wheel. Like I started to have that realization. And as you just said, like if by the time, if you all of a sudden wake up one day and you're like, I am tired, I can't do this anymore, you have waited way too long.
Mhm.
So I just had this epiphany that I would get to that point someday doing it, because I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the journey, but I knew that there were just bigger things that I wanted to go on to do, or other things, just different things, that this is not something that I wanted to do for the rest of my life. There was other things that I wanted to experience and try, both in business and in investing, and also just from a personal lifestyle standpoint. So, I like to say that you don't just wake up one day and decide to sell your business. You wake up one day and you decide to plan to sell your business.
Ooh, that's a
And
good. I
and
like that.
that's what I want to try to get across to business owners, and specifically, in my industry, Amazon and e-commerce sellers, is that no matter what, and I know you agree with this, Ryan, like even if you never end up selling your business, you should always know the value of your business. It's an asset, and you should know the value of that at all times, because you never know what might happen in life. You might have a great opportunity where a strategic acquirer or a private equity firm comes along and wants to acquire your brand. And how are you going to even have any intelligent conversations with them if you don't even know what your brand is worth? So, and vice versa, you could have a life event that you have to sell, and you don't want to sell it in a fire sale. You want to be able to get top dollar for all this equity that you've put into it. So I'm just really passionate about, reaching brand owners early on, even if they've just started their business, with building the business with an end in mind, like you like to say.
So I love. There's a lot of tidbits in there that I really like, obviously, but when you said you wake up and decide to plan to sell. So like when you started doing this, because one of the things that you and I reached out to, because we're going to be partnering up and we can be talking about that in a little bit, but like what was some of the challenges that you found, right? Because obviously I built the course and our boot camps because learning was the hardest part, right? Trying to find the right information. What were some of the experiences that you found were difficult, right? Because you said the number one thing is to understand what the value of the business or the brand is. What were some of the challenges that you were running into over those 24 months as you were building these building blocks of knowledge?
There were so many challenges, Ryan, because I found, as I started looking for resources and information, and at that time, I didn't find your course. I didn't have your course. I didn't know it existed at that time. So there was like the information that was out there was so fragmented, and I just had to kind of piecemeal together all the pieces for myself. And that took a really long time. So I felt like, in addition to running and operating my business, I also had to learn all this stuff and get my, like PhD in exit planning. And, I just learned from a lot of different resources. I mean, one of the books that was pivotal to me in getting started was Built to Sell by John Warlow. And I know you know that book, and I know you've had him on your podcast. And I found that to be very valuable. There certainly wasn't any resources on, how to build to sell an e-commerce or an Amazon brand based company, and that's not necessary. All businesses, have things in common that make them sellable or not. And so I was just trying to take those principles and apply them to my circumstances. And I found it very challenging. And so, now that I have this knowledge, I want to empower Amazon brand owners and e-commerce sellers with basically this knowledge and education that I've gathered, and help them along the way so it doesn't have to be so challenging and tough.
When you were learning about valuations, what were some insights that you learned? What did you have to right size your expectations, and then how did that impact the things that you were doing in the business?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I started learning all about, basically that every business is a unique asset. I mean, there's lots of variables, but the most important driver really is the sales price is going to be based on, the trailing 12 months of your what's called EBITDA. And most people, I think, are starting to know what that term means, but EBITDA stands for earnings before depreciation, interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. And it's like, well, what the hell does that mean? Right. And so basically, a simple way to look at it is your net income plus, some add backs. And, knowing what that cash flow multiple was, like I never tracked that kind of thing in my business. I never knew what my EBITDA was. And, I want to be able to empower sellers to know that they should always know what that number is. And so obviously, if the maximizing the value of any potential sale of my business was going to come down to my bottom line EBITDA, that's what I focused on. I focused on, really leaning out my operations. I wasn't focused on top line growth, although I did still grow top line, but I was really focused on that bottom line because I knew that, at the level that my business was going to sell for, it was going to be purely based on that bottom line EBITDA number and a multiple of that.
And no, super good insights. And I just wanted for some clarification, and you might have a couple examples, Kelly, of what you did in your business, but and this is for the listeners that might say, okay, well, I need to cut costs now to make this, look like it's bigger. There are add backs where if you're doing one-time investments, building out something that doesn't hurt you in your valuation, or it might hurt your net income that year, but it doesn't hurt your valuation. So you can't cut. There was some guy, I think it was Ken St. Gennaro, the guy that built the value opportunity profile of you can't cut your way to value because
Exactly.
someone else. So maybe you can kind of give an example, Kelly, of what you mean by leaning out or systematizing it compared to someone that probably in their head went straight to, hey, I'm going to slash my way to value.
For sure. And I think one example that comes up there pretty prominently is advertising, right? You don't just shut off advertising because you're going to save expenses on that, right? But you optimize your advertising. You make sure that, if I was operating at, on Amazon, we look at, a term called ACoS, your advertising cost of sale, for Amazon advertising. And, I was usually running at a break even, which is pretty typical on Amazon to drive organic rankings. And so, trying to basically get more out of my ad spend and then scale, spend more on advertising where it was more profitable. So I think advertising is a really good example there, but certainly there were a lot of unnecessary softwares that I was subscribed to, things like that. You just want to go through your profit and loss statement and look at all of your operating expenses and think, okay, is this expense really helping me at the end of the day to generate a profit in my business? Because that's the whole purpose of a business expense, right?
I love it. So then when you kind of had that realization, you have got that knowledge of, and in the intentional growth framework is the second principle of your financial targets evaluation. Where in your timeline was that? You said it took you 24 months. So were you 6 months out? Were you 12 months out, 18 months out? Did you have the ability to then invest in the business to grow that value to actually get the return of all your effort? And how did the strategies that you were implementing get changed based on your knowledge of your financial targets?
Well, that's a really important comment, Ryan, because, first of all, Rome isn't built in a day, and you really have to dig into your business and find out what those drivers are to increase your value. And what I identified, for my particular business at that time was streamlining my supply chain and supply chain management and reducing, my COGS, my cost of goods sold. And so those were the areas that I focused on. For every business owner, it's going to be different. And so it all comes down to you've got to have clean books and good financial bookkeeping and cash flow management to be able to identify where your money is going to be best spent in driving that value. But it's something that is so important. And it took me from, the time that I identified those things and working on them, that's where that 24 months came in. It doesn't happen overnight. So that's why it's so important to be thinking about these things, well before you intend to, try to sell your company.
So when you did it help them when you had this knowledge and the clarity to say, okay, now I'm going to focus on these things? I mean, was it way different than the things that you were working on before, or did it make it easier to make the decisions of what you were working on?
It did. It allowed me to be very precise and focus on the areas of my business that I was really going to be able to leverage and get the most value out of. For example, I identified that I wasn't going to be launching new products. I wasn't going to be spending money on research and development and product development. I had enough of a good product line, in my opinion, that wasn't going to be an area of focus for me. But for another business owner, that could be different.
So actually, that brings up a couple good examples. We've been on a couple calls where you've said you go to these conferences or trade shows and everybody needs to be everywhere. So explain how this laser focus makes those, like, what are some things that people shouldn't be doing that might not be value creating because everybody else is doing it or they've got some sort of FOMO going on?
Well, I can tell you that, specifically in the Amazon e-commerce world, there are so many shiny objects, and that is half the battle is, trying to stay focused and clear those out of your head. And I definitely fell victim to that for my first couple years in business. And even beyond, and still sometimes today I do, right? But it's like people are constantly telling you, you've got to be off Amazon, you've got to diversify, you've got to learn how to, sell on your own website, you've got to learn how to get into retail, you've got to learn how to do Facebook marketing, Pinterest marketing, you've got to learn how to do content marketing. Like, you have to do all the things, right? And then it's just like it's like a big, huge money grab. And it comes back to my initial kind of story of the internet marketing. And it just, over time, you're just in this like total whirlwind of like, I don't even know what I'm doing anymore to move the needle in my business. And I definitely was there. And I think a lot of Amazon sellers have been there, or are still there. And it's really hard just because of the internet age that we live in. Information just goes at lightning speed. And there is that huge fear of missing out, like you said. That if I don't learn this skill set, then I'm going to be one step behind my competitor. And, that's really, again, what it comes down to, knowing what your value drivers are and knowing what's going to move the needle in terms of increasing the value of your business.
I love it. Moving the needle and being able to quantify that, which is the value
Yes.
creation, being able to focus and quantify the value creation. Like, hey, this is my EBITDA. Here's how I'm growing my multiple. So as you're marching towards those longer, more intentional goals of value creation, what was the conversation? Who were you talking to about, like, what was the end going to look like, right? Because you sold the business, and you can, maybe we can kind of get into when and how did you start to sell? What was that process like? Due diligence, types of buyers. I mean, whatever way we want to go with this, Kelly, because you might have known that we've got a variety of listeners here. What was the triggering event, and what started the process, and who were you talking to?
Well, at that 2-year mark, like I said, that I started doing the planning, I would say I spent that first year really just educating myself. I didn't want to go to an intermediary to help me sell my business without like knowing the vernacular, knowing the things I should be doing in my business. So I really spent the time to educate myself, and for better or for worse, I feel like it was the right decision for me, but I certainly, again, would love to be able to help people shortcut that process so that they can kind of come to the table and not have to take, 2 years of planning and education to, be in a position to sell their business. I think it could be done a lot quicker. But, I connected with a lot of different resources. I'm a huge networker. So I did most of that, just virtually through LinkedIn, meeting a lot of different types of professionals and things like that, could help me with, exit planning. And I think, way back then I probably connected with you, but we didn't really start talking until, more recently. And so
I don't even know if we were like, if our Kona was even around by the time you were doing well.
it,
Yeah,
yeah,
it probably
I
was.
don't recall it coming across my radar because I really didn't find you guys till later. And so, I wish that was a resource that was there for me. And certainly, I wish there was a resource for my specific industry, which, as that's what Paul Miller and I are looking to do now, is to be that voice and that educational source
So
for.
as you were having these conversations, Kelly, this is obviously why I've got the team of advisors and principal number 5. What were your takeaways? Because you probably, coffees and Zoom meetings and this and that and the other thing. Like, what were your takeaways as you were learning what these different advisors do, and what was good, what was not good, what to watch out for? Because I'm sure there's a lot of other people doing the same stuff.
Yeah, well, you definitely need to have that dream team of advisors, and I would say, in most industries, including, my industry, you need to have solid bookkeeping, so a great bookkeeper, and specifically for Amazon sellers, you need to have somebody that understands how to do e-commerce bookkeeping, which is, has its own unique facets. And then you need a good CPA or tax advisor. Sometimes those are the same people. Ideally, they are, but sometimes they're not. Sometimes your CPA just prepares your tax returns and they're not giving you any strategic advice. I wish back then that I had somebody to help me with cash flow management. I think that most Amazon sellers Most business owners struggle with that. And so, I know that, if I had found your resource, you guys offer cash flow management and CFO services. Like, that's something that I think is hugely valuable. I kind of had to learn that kind of on my own with the bookkeeper that I had at the time. He did offer, some CFO, kind of advice, but I really think getting somebody involved in that early on in your exit planning is really valuable. And then, of course, a good attorney. And sometimes that's one attorney, just that's your general business counsel. But if you're going to be selling your business, you're going to want to have a good mergers and acquisitions attorney.
When you were having these calls with these advisors, and sorry, you might have a other list. You can continue the list, but I'm just curious, as you continue the list, how did you realize what good looks like? I mean, like, because I'm assuming you didn't just jump right on the first advisor that you guys were meeting with.
Yeah, it's a lot of time and a lot of vetting, and so that's another thing that I'm really wanting to help sellers with, is rather than having to go through all that painful vetting myself, is like, I have, a really good Rolodex now of trusted advisors and professionals in all of these areas that, can help with this stuff. But it's not easy. And it's certainly, my resources might not be the best fit for every single business, but they can at least be a stepping stone for, they could probably put them in touch with somebody that would be a good fit for them. There's certain things that are state specific. Like, I live in California. So when it came time to tax planning and all of that, like, there was a whole layer of stuff that was involved there. And I needed somebody that knew California, tax issues. But the last professional that I didn't mention, but is one of the most important, is your intermediary, the company that you're going to use to help you actually sell your business. And depending on the type of business and the level that you're at, sometimes that might be a business broker. Other times that might be an investment banking firm or a mergers and acquisitions advisor. So, that has really, there are a lot of options out there now in the e-commerce Amazon seller space for that. And I feel like most Amazon sellers don't know about these different types of intermediaries. And I would love to be able to provide some education, as time goes on, about that. What's the difference between, for example, a broker and an M&A advisor?
What did you realize as you were like probably going down this process with the business? Like, how did you envision the whole thing unfolding? And like as in, who would be the buyer? What would be the deal structure? Were there any kind of takeaways or like lessons learned as you were prepping it up, ready to go? And then what was the actual process like to sell the business?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, I did use an M&A advisor to help me sell my business, and I absolutely cannot recommend them enough. They deal with a certain, type and level of business, but they are big into the e-commerce and Amazon space. And prior to working with them, though, I had done all this education on my own and really studied, what entailed in the due diligence process. So I went into it knowing it was going to be a marathon. And it's, going through selling your business is a lot of work. It really is. But if you have a good intermediary by your side, they're going to make that process seamless and much easier for you. And I would say that with my particular circumstance, we really did all the due diligence up front before we ever put it out to market. So
You and the investment bankers did?
yes. Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. So maybe kind of give the listeners, what does that mean? What is due diligence? I mean, I've talked a lot about that on the show, but everybody's different. Everybody's situation is different, and especially who they're hiring. So what was, what was your experience? Cause it's never fun.
Well, again, like, I felt like we went into the due diligence period very, very prepared. And again, it's going to be unique for everybody, the length of time that goes on and what can happen during that process. But because we went to market with basically, a whole web portal full of everything you could possibly want to know about my business under the hood, financials, trademarks. I mean, everything you could want to know about the business was there to be reviewed. And so you're basically instilling trust in your buyer that, everything that we've represented is true and there's nothing to hide. And, I actually spent the week with my buyer. We arranged during the due diligence process. He came out to California. We met every day. and we went through, some of his questions, and that really built that trust. So I think that due diligence is the time where you are wanting to have all your ducks in a row. You don't want any surprises coming up. And so the more you can be prepared for that beforehand, the better.
So, and that should be what the intermediary is doing, is prepare, like premeditating those questions that will
Exactly.
come. So was it a listing? Did they slap you on a listing, or did they go find these buyers? Were they strategic buyers? Were they individual investors? Were they private equity firms? Like, what was the actual? So you got this web portal, you got all this due diligence loaded in there after you and the bankers like went through all this stuff. What was the actual process to get you in front of that buyer that you started meeting with?
Yeah. So, working with an M&A advisor, and I would just have to assume that the process is similar. It's a lot different than working with a broker in that they're not just, emailing your listing or creating a listing, even for that matter, and just, shoving it off to some email list. So basically, we spent, I would say 2 to 3 months of our engagement building out all of those due diligence materials. So gathering all of that stuff, and them, asking me the hard questions if there were things that came up, so that, there would be no surprises when we actually showed this. And then they built what's called an offering memorandum. It's basically a huge marketing package that it was really robust, and basically was just like a huge deck on, all the great things about my brand and why somebody should acquire it. And when they did launch the offering memorandum, they do it to, they've already identified who is going to be a good fit versus just sending it out to the world. And then they do the selling. They were very thorough. They got on all the calls. I only ever got on the call with the individual who ended up acquiring my brands once he had submitted an indication of intent, which is kind of like a preliminary step before the letter of intent. And so I wasn't just fielding all these different questions from different potential acquirers. It was,
What was that list like, Kelly? Was it private equity firms, or was it just mainly strategic buyers, other Amazon sellers? Like what like did they share with you what the list was like?
yes.
And
Yeah. Well, they didn't share. They shared with me like the type based on, I had a 7-figure business. So, and, the target valuation that I had was for 7 figures. So, it really depends on, to like attract a strategic, that's usually a much higher level, more like an 8-figure business. It depends. But, my brand, they thought there was some possibility that we could attract a strategic buyer, but they really identified that the pool of potential buyers for my business was going to be, a corporate professional, looking to acquire an internet Amazon based business. And, that is kind of who they identified, and then worked within that realm of their network, if that makes sense.
yeah, totally makes sense. And I think because like even getting educated on like who the different types of buyers are. I mean, there's I've talked to too many people where they think that it's going to be like this short list of strategic buyers, and it's just wildly different than they thought. And that's the
Yes.
point, right? I mean, it's having someone out there shaking the trees for you.
Yeah. And again, being educated about all the different types of buyers, and, your course is great. And going into that, I mean, really influences the process. Like if you're going to be acquired by private equity, it's going to be a completely different process and experience than selling to, an acquirer that purchased my brand. So, you really want that fit, and you want an intermediary who can identify who the best fit for you is, who's going to see the value in your brand and pay you top dollar for that.
Did the pricing or terms and conditions or deal structure change throughout due diligence? I mean, what was the due diligence and that conversation like?
Yeah, I would say during due diligence, the things that came up the most in terms of negotiating points and things were, if things did get a little bit heated, were on like the non-compete agreements, and obviously drafting, the main contract is the asset purchase agreement. So there's a lot that goes into that. And so, we had a lot of give and take. That's definitely a negotiating time frame that you have to get through, and you have to be willing to, know when you want to play hardball and know when you're going to, basically succumb to the other party's demands. But, I would say that your goal should be to have a successful due diligence period that it's going to result in some renegotiation, but it's gonna go smoothly because the parties come to that period trusting each other.
Yeah, huge. I mean, the trust is, I mean, because the moment that you don't trust someone, how do you even pursue a deal? And like it's especially when you're handing off, and especially if there's like if you're handing off the at your company and then there's seller financing or any of that stuff. I mean, like or COVID. Like,
Yes, exactly.
so after you like, because we got probably what 10 minutes left or something. Is what was it after you had closed the deal? What was your experience? And like it'll maybe kind of get us to where you are today and some of the lessons learned. Like what is your mission behind this? Because like you learned a lot, right? Like you said, you got your PhD in how to sell a business. I'd say the typical way that people do. Obviously, we're trying to change some of that, but like what was maybe get us to up to where you are today.
Yeah. So, after the sale of my brand, something that was negotiated in due diligence was basically the amount of time that I would stay on to help with the transition. So that time was 60 days, which is pretty standard. So I stayed on for 60 days. Our agreement was basically 5 hours a week, but, I don't think that the person who acquired my company, he's just really understanding. And I made it really, seamless for him to kind of take over. And so, after going through that, I I would say that, looking back on the whole experience, it was like I was super proud that I went through it and did it and it was successful. And I felt really good about, the because your brand is like your baby, and it's still sometimes so hard to think that it's not mine anymore. And so I stay in touch with him regularly. I really care and am, mentally, emotionally invested in his success and want, he's got big plans to grow it to an 8, 9 figure company. So, I wish him all the best in that. And I really think he'll be able to do it. And for me now, I just have this peace of mind that, I de-risked my situation. And every time you have all of your money tied up anywhere, whether it's an investment or business, it's a risk. And so I was able to take those chips off the table and breathe a sigh of relief of, having some financial freedom. Certainly I'm not done. I'm just getting started in terms of, what I want to do as an entrepreneur. But like anything I do, I can do with the sense of like, I don't have to do this to keep the lights on. Like I want to do this. And it's a really freeing feeling. And I feel like I'm so free that I can go and pursue whatever I want to without that hamster wheel feeling anymore.
So a little bit different even than the hourly rate too, right? Oh
Yeah,
my gosh.
exactly. Exactly.
Is there anything that you would have done differently along the process? And did you realize like throughout the sale, like could there have been other value creating strategies that you implemented, or is there
Oh,
anything?
for sure, for sure. I mean, I wish that I had from the very beginning built my business with an end in mind or an exit strategy. Just having that exit strategy allows you to become laser focused on exactly what you need to be doing to make your business as successful as possible. And, like I know you've shared with me, Ryan, that like many of the clients and students that you've worked with, they go through this process of taking your course, with the intention of selling their business. And then they come to the conclusion that, what, like, I know exactly what I need to do now. I don't feel like I'm on the hamster wheel because I'm laser focused and I don't want to sell it actually. So it's allowing you to have that freedom of knowing like I don't need to chase this shiny object. I know exactly what I need to do to make this business successful. And having that clarity is very, very powerful and freeing.
So as we're about to wrap up here, what's the best way to get in touch with you? What are you doing now? What is a life? I mean, the podcast title is not Life After Business anymore, but what is your current life that you're designing?
Well, I have my own consultancy called Digital Shelf Strategy, and that really is, a one-on-one consulting service that I do. It's consulting and coaching where I help Amazon sellers with all things related to Amazon, basically optimizing their business, anything that they would need in terms of optimizing their operations, increasing profitability. I have just vetted resources and service providers that I can recommend to help them with that. And then, of course, with exit planning. So helping them navigate that and then connecting them with any resources they would need. But after I started doing that kind of on my own, I realized that, this would be a lot more fun to do with somebody else. And so my really good friend, Paul Miller, who a lot of people in my space know, he's got a very successful brand called Cozy Phones. We
I've
just
got a couple.
I know it's such a great product, and he created that whole category, and it's just that's so amazing. But he is now starting on his journey of exit planning, and so we thought, wow, wouldn't it be really cool to follow his journey of exit planning with Cozy Phones? Share that with our audience on a podcast. And so we're going to be launching a podcast called Amazing Exits, and we don't have a specific date, but it will be sometime this summer. And then, as you know, we've been working very closely with you because you and your partner, Pat, have created the best in class educational resources along with, CFO services for business owners. And there's no reason why Paul and I would want to go out and create these things when they already exist. You guys have created them. So we want to be able to share these with our audience, with our industry, and really help people be prepared. We want to make exit planning sexy and fun and not this like dreaded thing, like, oh my gosh, it's so fun to go through the process and to really kind of navigate that and realize, what your goals and drivers are. It gives you so much clarity and freedom, like I said before. So we're just excited to get the word out, and we're going to have, top experts. We're going to have other businesses who have exited. We're going to have, great professionals like you on, and be able to offer, all the resources that Amazon and e-commerce sellers would need to not only optimize their businesses, but prepare them for sale if they choose to do that.
Well, I think it's so fun to have people like you and Paul out there that are like, I mean, what Pat and I have done is created a neutral educational of like, hey, this is how valuations and value growth work. Here's all the exits. So then you can intentionally just do whatever you want. Like that's truly what it is. But it takes people like yourself. We're not experts in Amazon. Like we would never say that we are, but here's how businesses work. Here's how businesses should run. Here's how to grow value. And then you layer on the industry experts or trade industry or the trade specifics that are in like so niched in, and what you guys are doing, and you can take and run with it then. I think it's gonna be fun because I think what's interesting about and maybe we can just kind of end on this because, like, your industry, Kelly, when you and I started talking, Amazon resellers are like way okay with the word exit. Because, like, the reality is what we teach is, well, you can do whatever you want. Where, like, a lot of the people that in the main street, it's like, hey, I want to keep this for a long time. But the process is the same. It's literally exactly the same. But your industry is so okay with the conversation that it's just going to be fun to watch how it all unfolds and how people take hold to it, because they're out there grinding to grow value. I mean, like, and actually they've more got a laser focus on an exit. I don't know if you got any comments on that, because I just noticed that the industries are very different.
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. I think that Amazon sellers and e-commerce sellers are very comfortable with this notion. There are some good resources out there now that talk about exit planning and so forth. And, I think there's a large majority of e-commerce and Amazon sellers that know full well that their biggest payday in this type of a business is going to be when they sell. And so there's many people that are ready for that and want to know how to do it and maximize the value, but they don't know where to go or where to start. They just think that they just go to, whatever broker, and that's all there is. And there's not. So we want to really be, able to educate people on that, make it fun, and also be able to leverage all these amazing, educational resources that you guys have already put together with your intentional growth course. I mean, as you know, Paul and I have both gone through that. We're going to be applying that to Cozy Phones, and to be able to share that journey with our audience, I think is going to be so valuable. At least I hope it will be.
So as the listeners want to follow your journey, as they're going to follow Cozy Phones, what's the best way to get in touch with you? Where can they follow you, and where should they go?
Yeah, so they can go to my LinkedIn profile, which is at Kellianne Fedio, KELLIANNE FEDIO. They can also go to Digital Shelf Strategy and schedule a complimentary call with me. And then I would love it if they would go to our new podcast landing page. It's called amazingexits.com, and just sign up so that they can stay informed of when we launch and when we get going with all that.
Excited for you guys. It's going to be fun to watch it.
Thanks. We are too.
Thanks for coming on, Kelly. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Ryan. It's been a blast.